What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim. Super excited to get our first of 4 Pac-12, now Big 10 or Big 18, or however many teams you want to talk about it, in our series of the State of the Programs. Excited to have Kevin Balaji of Bruin Source talking all about the UCLA Bruins. If you like the podcast, make sure to like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, like and subscribe. And if you want to send me an email, big10footballtalk@gmail.com. But without further ado, let me introduce to you Kevin Balaji of Bruin Source. Kevin, thanks for joining us.
Zach, great to be here. I'm really excited to be here and to talk to Big Ten country. Obviously, I grew up watching a lot of Big Ten football. I'm excited to talk about UCLA here too.
Yeah, and I'm grateful that you have shifted allegiances because, as my listeners know, I'm a big Buckeye fan, and you grew up in Michigan country, but now you've switched sides to UCLA. So I feel like we can be friends. So
I was born in Michigan country. I grew up watching Michigan. I've watched a lot of Buckeye beatdowns growing up because that's when I grew up.
Yeah.
Right. But
painful memories.
Those painful memories. But I'm all UCLA. I went to school at UCLA, graduated from UCLA, and that's why we do this podcast. That's why we do Bruin Source now. Myself, Zed, Isaiah, a few of us, all UCLA grads. We do Bruin Source now. We try to cover all things that are UCLA, football, basketball, and other sports as well. And so you can find us all at Bruin Source, and we try to get some podcasts out there too on a weekly basis. So we're all on all the major podcast platforms. So that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, whatever that might be. And we drop usually every Wednesdays, Wednesday evening Pacific time. So they're usually out sometime Wednesday night, and catches all the news that happens in the previous week. We try to do it again once a week. So really excited to be here and talk UCLA with the Big Ten country.
Yeah, for sure. And you're also a member of the College Huddle community as well. And so excited to have you as part of that. And you do all sports, right? Is it mainly football and basketball, or do you cover other UCLA sports as well?
Mainly football and basketball, but the women's basketball tournament, UCLA made a run in that. We covered that as well. UCLA just made a run in women's softball. We talked about that on this last podcast. So we'll cover the major UCLA events. Naturally football and basketball are the big ones that we'll cover.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, we're excited on this podcast to talk football, and there's a lot to talk about with UCLA, not just with football, but I think even just traditions. The Big Ten is a tradition-laden league, and I think UCLA brings a lot of tradition with it as well. And so I'm excited. We were talking pre-show, just excited to kind of pick your brain on what makes UCLA distinct and unique. So I'm excited to get into that. But before we do that, UCLA has probably been the program coming in with maybe the most intrigue and mystique, because with USC and Oregon, you kind of know what you're getting. Powerhouse programs. With Washington, they were the national runner-up, but there's a lot of transition. With UCLA, they've kind of felt like an unknown. Obviously, a lot of stuff going on with Chip Kelly. You have Deshaun Foster taking over the program. Let me start with this. Obviously, Chip Kelly was there for a number of years, and now he's left. Describe what the journey has been like for UCLA from the beginning to the end of Chip Kelly.
Yeah, and it's a fun story for those who don't know it. I think the Chip Kelly experience was very unique in a particular way. You have bad coaches. You have coaches that they're hired and for whatever reason doesn't work out, and it's fine. You move on to the next guy. It's really hard to take a coach that from day one shows you that they don't really want to be there and they don't want to do the job of a college football coach. And that kind of fundamentally was why the Chip Kelly experience was a little unique. And I think to tell the story, you got to go back to how Chip Kelly was hired and what UCLA was like when he first got there. it was very un-UCLA like to move off of Jim Mora, Chip Kelly's predecessor, after a pretty successful, first 3 to 4 years where they were winning 9-10 games. They were in the national conversation. A lot of stacked rosters looking back on it when you look at the players that played in the NFL and kind of who's still out there. But he had a couple of bad years, and UCLA cut bait. They cut bait, and they went out and got the best coach in the marketplace, which at that time, ahead of the likes of Florida, ahead of the likes of Nebraska, which was Chip Kelly. And that was, again, a very un-UCLA-like thing to do, who traditionally is pretty conservative with how they manage their sports and such. And Chip Kelly, UCLA was flush with cash. They just built a brand new, state-of-the-art football facility. They gave him carte blanche to kind of do whatever he wanted. But early on, the warning signs were there for people to see that Chip was not really motivated to be here. His first recruiting cycle, it was clear, like, we were just literally not offering players. We were not recruiting. And, the number of players to like spots that we had in the class, like the math wasn't adding up. Those players would, various recruiting reports, you'd hear that, hey, like, I don't know what's going on with UCLA. They're not reaching out to me. Right. So that's the kind of stuff that's going on. Funny story, Mason Graham, who's now at Michigan, right? Like before the Rose Bowl, he's from Anaheim. He's from California. And, he went out and talked about how UCLA was his dream school. And he camped at UCLA multiple times and didn't hear from anyone. And just didn't hear from anyone. So you hear that, you see this, pretty quickly eliminated all the forms of public fan engagement. We had things like, I think they're whatever, but, everything helps. The Bruin Walk, Bruin Fan Day. Got rid of spring games and turned the spring game into like the special teams practice at the track field, like stuff like that. And so this stuff has all happened in the first 5-6 months he's there. And I think at the time, UCLA fans just kind of look past it, right? Because it's Chip Kelly. It's Chip Kelly, the genius from Oregon, and you kind of look past all that stuff. But then the first 3 seasons happen. And those first 3 years in total, we win 10 games over 3 years, right? And it was the worst 3-year run since like pre-World War II for UCLA football. But then there came this little lifeline for Chip Kelly. And I came about, I would say after the 2020 season when this thing called the transfer portal showed up. And early on, if we remember the transfer portal, it wasn't like used in the first couple of years how it is today, where everyone's kind of all over it. I would say Chip Kelly, partly because, again, he didn't really recruit in high school, took the transfer portal as like his big opportunity. And he got a lot of guys through there. So he got players like Zach Charbonnet, who, they were from the California footprint, but they went elsewhere and then they came back, right? Got Jake Bobo, got some offensive linemen. So he plugged some holes in the roster in those initial years of the transfer portal, which I think set the foundation for those 8 and 9 win seasons that kind of followed that. But then when you investigate that a little deeper, you find out that, sometimes scheduling luck is just a part of this, right? And UCLA's record against any team with a winning record, so just 500 or above in his entire tenure, was 6-28.
Wow.
So like, the moment we played a team with a pulse, like, we were usually toast. And that kind of sets us up to this past season where, again, UCLA riding some scheduling luck. They finish 8-4 again. But I think a lot of things are about to catch up to Chip Kelly, and he sees the writing on the wall. UCLA has just signed its worst ever recruiting class in the history of recorded statistics about recruiting classes.
Yep.
The transfer portal is now no longer a secret. Everyone's in on the transfer portal. So it's not just Chip Kelly going out and getting players. And this thing called NIL, that's a bit of an issue now, right? And, Chip Kelly has pretty much ignored donors since the moment he got here. Now, when you really need them, they're not there for him. The NIL collectives at UCLA are trying to come to him and say, please, like, help us out here. Let's do some fundraising. And he just sees it as not his job. And yet, around the country, you see Nick Saban, Jim Harbaugh, like prominent coaches, they're doing it, and it's above Chip Kelly somehow, right? And so, all this, the writing's kind of on the wall, and that's when I think he starts looking for those offensive coordinator jobs. And UCLA almost fired him at this point, but because of budgetary issues and whatnot, they didn't do it. That's what they say. That's another discussion altogether. But that's when he starts looking for the offensive coordinator jobs, actively sought out, the Seahawks, the Commanders, the Raiders, like anything that's open, really. Struck out on all of them. He put his name out for the Boston College head coaching job, which, Bill O'Brien ends up like taking that. So struck out on that one too. rumor has it he even talked to Kirk Ferentz about the Iowa offensive coordinator job at one point.
Yep.
You know?
I had heard smoke similar to that.
Yeah. So clearly, like, the allure of Chip Kelly, it had faded a bit, and, Ohio State comes around and this is kind of the natural landing spot, right? It's Ryan Day, his former protege, former quarterback, that then kind of picks him up and he goes over there to ride off into the sunset, making, a couple $1 million. And, I think a couple of things have really annoyed UCLA fans, since then, which is, again, you can forgive a coach for being bad. We've had bad coaches. The reason you don't know about UCLA as much is because we haven't been nationally competitive for a while, right? So there's been bad coaches in there. I think the reaction to Chip Kelly is a little different, just because of all that went into it. It's hard to accept a coach that doesn't want to do the job of being a coach.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because on the other side of that, like I have cautious optimism with Chip as the offensive coordinator. One of the things, though, that I think, and it's a positive, I think, on the Ohio State end, is he looks rejuvenated, but I think it's because he doesn't have to do the things that you were talking about, which is NIL, not a ton of recruiting, not talking with donors, which in a lot of ways, that's the new world of being a college football head coach. Which it doesn't mean that UCLA fans are wrong and Ohio State fans are right. I think it's just more, you're helping us understand the fuller picture of kind of the rocky life and coaching career of Chip Kelly. It's like, as this has shifted, he did not shift.
Yeah, I have no doubt that he can put together a good offense at Ohio State. Particularly given the roster that y'all have coming back. I don't doubt that he can put together a good offense there. And recruiting is kind of taken care of for you.
Yeah.
The apparatus setup. The only caution I would give to like Ohio State fans, and it's an abstract one, is just this isn't a very highly motivated individual right now. And he hasn't been since like the Philadelphia Eagles. And now, how does that play out? I mean, maybe because he can coordinate offense, it doesn't matter, right? Like we'll find out about that. But for UCLA in particular, no matter who the coach was, it was just untenable in the year 2024 with Chip Kelly. The scheduling luck was about to run out. We're going into the Big Ten. We're going to talk about the schedule. It's a bear, right? And that way of running a program, it's sad that the school let it run as it did for so long, but they did, and they need to move off of it.
Yeah. Well, there's something to be said, and I've said this about a number of programs, like you have those years that look, on the surface good. So you're talking about those 8-9 win seasons, but just because you have 8-9 win seasons doesn't, like, there's fool's gold all the time in college football. And I think the thing that you're helping us see, Kevin, is that UCLA had a bit of fool's gold that allowed them to keep Chip longer than he should have been there.
Yeah, and I think the funny thing is the fan base and the alums kind of saw through it. I bet if you ask the school administrators, they saw through it. But, UCLA has their own way of kind of doing things sometimes. Chip, I think, he knows a lot of people in the media, and they try to sell a story about, how, he had to tear the program down those first 3 years to the studs so that he could build it back up to this 8-9 win program. And the problem with that is, when you think about it, Carl Durrell, the guy that went 1-11 in Colorado, he won 10 games here. Jim Mora won 10 games multiple times. So this idea that we had to tear down to the studs to come back to a level that was worse than the other coaches before that also got fired, right? It doesn't add up. So I think, again, we had to get out of this. I'm excited about Deshaun Foster. I mean, obviously it comes with its own concerns, but the mere fact that, we're starting to operate like a college football program should in 2024, I think is the right next step.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Deshaun Foster, because I think Deshaun, obviously a legacy, UCLA legacy, great player, and has really been a good position coach for a number of years at UCLA. How are you guys feeling about him kind of moving from his position coach position to all of a sudden being the head guy?
Yeah, I think the first thing that excites me is that he's showing passion, and again, he's doing the things that you need to do as a college football coach in this day and age. Because again, like what was going on before with Chip Kelly, it's beyond wins and losses. The infrastructure of UCLA football is pretty much on the ground now in this day and age of NIL and such. Deshaun Foster is doing the hard work of getting that all back up. So he's a Bruin himself. He's a player the last time that UCLA was like truly a national power back in the late 90s. And so he's hired a staff with some pretty good experience. Eric Bieniemy, he's the big name, but there's some
Great
other
hire.
good. Yeah. And I usually sometimes these NFL hires, you get skeptical of them because it's like, are you going to bring your big NFL playbook and try to translate it to college kids and whatnot? And are they going to like to do, again, the job of what you need to do in college? But I think those questions kind of early on have been answered. UCLA, once again, they're going back to offering players. They're hosting official visit weekends in the spring and the summer. He's, Deshaun Foster, he's engaging with donors. And in a short time, I think he's built the UCLA NIL apparatus to a better place. There's still a lot of work to do there, but he's built it in a short time to a much better place. Bringing back, fan engagement. So, opening up spring practices again. He has these, unique fan events like Friday Night Lights and such, where spring practices on a Friday night and people come out. That's like a fun thing to do. He did the spring game again, and he got some good wins in the transfer portal early, because of some of the NIL work that he did. So those things I think are good, early wins. Those results are promising. UCLA sits right now at around about 30 in the recruiting rankings.
Yeah.
And based on the irons in the fire, it looks like they should have a good chance to finish in the 20-25 range, which is just about where UCLA should be given its proximity and its location to talent and things of that nature.
Yeah.
The worry, I think, that coming into this was, he's coming from Chip Kelly's staff. And the worry was, is that the playbook that he's going to take over and use? But, that's not happened. I think the next worry then is that, naturally the football stuff. He's a new head coach. He hasn't done this before. We don't know anything about the actual football side of this. And again, we're not going to have the schedules we had in the last 3 years. We're not going to have the non-conference schedules this year that we had the last 3 years. And so, he's created some early buzz. I think he has a window here where, what we have to avoid is the cratering season. I don't think you can recover when you have the kind of start that, Chip Kelly had, 3-9, 4-8. Like that's hard to recover from in this day and age. So if he can avoid that and he can get to, some kind of like a bowl game or something, I think he'll have a good story to sell. He'll be able to raise some good NIL. So yeah, overall, I'm excited that we have someone representing our school well. And I think you'll see our fans respond to Deshaun well, even if like the record isn't as good as last year, just because of that.
Well, and I appreciate one of the first things you said was his passion, which is what seemed to be lacking with Chip. It's like with NIL and with the transfer portal, with recruiting, what do you need to sell? Well, you need to sell that there's a vision for this place. And It sounds like that's, and I think the other thing, I am also concerned about his lack of head coaching experience, but sometimes, especially like in a situation where you're either rebuilding or reforming, it's like you don't know what you don't know, and that can actually be a good thing. So I wonder if that actually, like, it sounds like there's a lot of excitement, a lot of enthusiasm, and even the negatives, you're like, yeah, they're negatives, but like this could really work.
Yeah, and the job of a head coach, and I think this is why, on the Ohio State side, why Ryan Day went out and got Chip Kelly, right? The job of a head coach in 2024 is it's just different. And a lot of the energy and the excitement and whatnot is like a huge part of that. Deshaun being an alum, like he steps into that role well. And I think to his credit, he hired really good football coaches around him, right? The likes of Eric Bieniemy, Juan Castillo from the Chiefs as the offensive line coach, right? Like you got some good football coaches around there too. It's good that, UCLA, again, they're waking up, brushing their teeth, taking a shower, doing the basic things. Like that's the first step. And then you can get to, the field and the wins and losses.
Yeah. We'll talk about the schedule a bit later, but you've already alluded to the the competition is stepping up as you join the Big Ten. What are some of the advantages of joining the league in your mind? And what do you feel like you're losing by leaving the old Pac-12?
Yeah, it's a big change, obviously. And the advantage is, I think, unfortunately, we have to start with money because fundamentally that's what's driving this, right? The Pac-12, I could do a whole podcast just on like the fall of the Pac-12 and kind of what happened there. But bad leadership from its administrators. The Pac-12 networks was a complete money sink, and it just so happens that all these things are happening while the league has its worst like 8 to 10 year run in football at the same time. Because I grew up watching Michigan, right? So like in the 2000s, I remember the opposite story. I remember, how because I was a Big Ten fan then. Like the Big Ten was the slow old league, right? And their teams would go and get plastered in every bowl game that they played, and USC would crush and kill everyone they saw in the Rose Bowl. Like that, I remember that age too. And it just so happens that the flip side bump comes at the most crucial time in collegiate athletics as well, right? So going forward now, I think with revenue sharing, the Big Ten and SEC just look to be the only two conferences that financially can be viable in this, right? I mean, you think about the $20 million you give to athletes or 25 or whatever the number is, you take that away, you still will have more in television revenue than the entirety of what the Big 12 is getting right now. So, I mean, UCLA, to its credit, usually conservative in athletics, took the jump to the Big Ten before it was forced into a situation where it had to be given a bad choice. Some of our other Pac-12 brethren or other University of California brethren, right, Cal, was essentially forced into a situation where they're going to the ACC and making no money just because they want to participate in athletics, right?
Yep.
And UCLA doesn't have to do that. What I'm looking forward to, the games against the marquee opponents, they're going to be fun. I don't look forward to playing Ohio State in our current position right now, and Ohio State's current position. But thinking about Ohio State and Michigan and these big brands coming to the Rose Bowl and us going to the Horseshoe and the Big House and Penn State and all these big environments, I mean, that's exciting. It's going to be great to watch no matter what happens on the field. And the league's going to live in all three time zones. That's going to be great from an exposure standpoint. I think the Pac-12 really suffered on that angle when, a lot of their games, you're still going to see, I think, primarily the West Coast teams play at night because they can and the others can't. But the fact that the league will get coverage broadly, across the country is going to be a positive. I could also see a future where there's a foundation for West Coast teams here and more of them come back in. And I don't know, maybe this looks like the Pac-12 within the Big Ten all over again. Who knows where this all goes? But I'll definitely miss the Pac-12. It was the league was destined to its fate for some time, but UCLA had a history of competing against these schools for about 100 years. And college sports, so much of it is about the pageantry and the rivalries and the kind of the local matchups and such that you have. And you think about, the schools like Arizona State and Stanford and Cal, like their alumni, they all come to LA, they come to San Fran, they all live in the footprint here. And so, we have a lot in common, coworkers, friends and such that went to all these schools. We don't have that with Iowa and Minnesota and Indiana, right? Like we don't have that. We'll hopefully develop it, right? But we don't have that. So I'm definitely going to miss the Pac-12, miss the games. I'm really going to miss the concept of, the Pac-12 and the Big Ten meeting up in the Rose Bowl. That's been gone for a while. But there's just something to be said about, again, the pageant college football, and those are things that they're not going to be here, and that's sad.
Yeah, I think in all of it, I was just talking about this on the Big Ten huddle, but I think the smart people, when they saw expansion happening, there was both optimism and sadness. because there's the optimism like, hey, like there are good things happening in this sport. And it means there's also drawbacks. And I think one of the things you're bringing up, Kevin, that I think we're all feeling to some degree, but I think especially UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington is we're losing more and more of the pageantry and the actual college part of college football. And last night, this is airing on Monday, so last Tuesday, I'll say,
Yeah.
we were talking about how the Axe game between Minnesota and Wisconsin got moved to a Friday at noon. You're like, great for the networks and great for exposure. Terrible for the actual students who want to go see a game. They have to come back to from Thanksgiving early to see an 11 a.m. kick. It's like, that is not thinking about your college students at all. And that's the drawback. And I think
Well, and
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'll give you the parallel there because our homecoming game this year was marked before. It was Iowa. And the networks have put that game on Friday at 6 p.m. Now, we're going to talk about the Rose Bowl in a little bit, but one of the drawbacks of the Rose Bowl, it's not easy to get to. Yeah. There ain't gonna be anyone there at kickoff at 6 p.m.
Oh my gosh!
You're gonna have to leave work at like 3:30 if you're trying to get there by 6 p.m. Like to do all the stuff before the game and get in there. But the networks, that's not what they're about, right? They want to fill that Friday evening time slot, 6 p.m. with a place that can actually host it. So I think the TV part of this taking over definitely has its drawbacks. I think a subplot to watch in the next couple of years is, does this really just become about 30 schools and the playoff, or is this greater exposure going to lead to just a better overall game? I'm trying to keep an open mind about that because I think one of the cool things about college football was it wasn't all about the national championship. Like your school had defined success however they defined it, right? So for us at UCLA, like we wanted to compete for the Pac-12 championship, and if we were, in a position to be in the playoff, like we were in like 2014-15 and compete for that, like that's great. But other schools like Ohio State, they always just want to play for the national champion. Like you could have success and happiness in different degrees of that. And I think one of the things going forward is the playoff is kind of what it's all about. And if that's the case, then, it decreases the level of number of teams that can participate in that. So it'll be something interesting to watch.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And I think even like you're losing the pageantry, but you're also you're losing what matters and what's important in the sport. So I think that's a really good thought.
Yeah.
I think I think some people are probably familiar with Ethan Garbers and Michael Sturdivant. They're returning for the Bruins. Sturdivant in particular had a tremendous bowl game. Who else should we be looking for as we look at the 2024 UCLA Bruins? Who are the playmakers on both sides of the ball that we should be looking out for?
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of them. So I think J. Michael Sturdivant is definitely at wide receiver the playmaker that has the most potential. It was clear that he was one of our better offensive players last season. He transferred from Cal where from his freshman year where he had like an 800-900 yard season for like a really terrible Cal offense and came into UCLA. Last year we just never really got him the ball. The whole, the thing that went back and forth between, Dante Moore and Ethan Garbers and stuff like that at quarterback. We didn't really get him the ball until the bowl game. And the bowl game, I think he showed up and showed out. And Eric Bieniemy, we don't know exactly what the offense will look like, but in the NFL, his offense was a lot about, quick passing game and getting the ball out to receivers and such. So he should be a beneficiary of that. Ethan Garbers at quarterback, he had a very steady end to the year. Dante Moore, the prize recruit from Detroit, which I'm sure many in the Midwest know about, right? He came out here. He really struggled. I don't think he was set up for success very much. The fact that our offensive line was in shambles because of how we hadn't recruited, I think really affected him on a lot of those fronts. Sure. And so Ethan Garbers, I think, he came in when Dante Moore was struggling and kind of played that game manager role, and he did it well. And that's why, again, the end to the season was much better than the middle of it, because Ethan Garbers came in and just kind of steadied the hand, stopped throwing pick sixes, stopped throwing picks at all, and just move the the offense. So I'm excited to see what he does this year, because I think we need him to be a little bit more than that in this upcoming season. Because last year, I think UCLA, for the first time, in a long time, we had a lot of guys on defense that really stepped up, and we're not going to have a lot of those guys this year at the edge rusher and so on and so forth. So we're going to need, I think, Ethan Garbers to step up a bit more. A couple other guys, Jay Toya at defensive tackle. That's UCLA's best overall player, I would say. He had his brief flirtation with the transfer portal, and he got offered by the likes of Texas and some big name schools, for some big NIL packages, and he chose to stay. And he's going to be drafted highly next season. I don't know if it's going to be first round, second round, or whatever that looks like, but he'll be up there, and he's going to be a key for us, because UCLA's defense, again, edge rusher with the likes of Leatu Latu, who was drafted by up high out there. We lost a lot over there, the Murphy twins. And so now we really need to be stout against the run if we're not going to have the edge pressure that we had last year. And Jay Toya, I think, is going to be a big key to that. Running back, I think, is an interesting place to watch. I'm excited to see what happens with TJ Harden. He ran well last year. He has some good physical attributes, big guy, strong, relatively fast. But it's going to be a new system for him this year. Again, Eric Bieniemy, likes to get the ball out on the perimeter, also likes to use his backs in pass catching situations. So that's going to be a fun thing to watch, how that all goes. Overall, I would say the overall note on the playmakers and such, the UCLA team this year, I would say it's not as talented as we'd like it to be for all the reasons we've discussed already, but it has enough pieces to be, just dangerous enough to where you can avoid the cratering season. I don't think this needs to be, the fateful 3-9, 4-8 kind of year that really puts you behind the 8 ball. I think there's enough on here to where you can win enough games to get some excitement back.
Yeah. Well, and I think if Sturdivant plays up to his potential, and Harden is a good piece, and you said Toya is the defensive tackle. Toya. Yeah, I mean, those are to have a good receiver, a good quarterback, good running back, and a good defensive tackle. That really helps in a lot of situations, especially if you can stop the run. So, yeah, you're talking about avoiding the cratering season. The schedule is not kind. 3-game stretch of at LSU, home against Oregon, at Penn State, and then road trips to Nebraska, Rutgers, and Washington. And I know some people might think Rutgers is Rutgers of old. They're not. They're a much improved squad. And then Fresno State is not a gimme group of 5 opponent. As you look at this schedule, what is the best case and worst case for UCLA this year?
Yeah, well, so the reason that Fresno State is not an easy group of 5 opponent is because we've stubbed our toe on them quite a number of times. So we UCLA, we know all about that. So the schedule is interesting in that. So you got the first 2 games, Hawaii and Indiana, which you really want to get off to a good start there and avoid the oh my god, this is going to be a disaster kind of feeling, right? You want to get off to that. Because then it's murderer's row there for 3 weeks. You got at LSU, home to Oregon, at Penn State. UCLA would be lucky to win a game there. And I think, if they could win a game, it would be a great statement. But I think most people will forgive them for losing all 3, honestly. And then you reach the next stretch, home to Minnesota, at Rutgers, at Nebraska. These games at home, that's not against the major powers, if you will. UCLA is going to have to hold serve, and this stretch right here of Rutgers and Nebraska, I'm with you because again, like I still watch a lot of Big Ten football, and Rutgers always, Greg Schiano team always stout against the run, very stout on defense always, and on the road, that's going to be tricky. At Nebraska, funny enough, UCLA has had success under Jim Mora. We went to Nebraska a few times, and we did well there. But Nebraska is going to Matt Rule's second year. It's going to be better, and so I think you'd hope to win one of those games over there. And then the finishing slate, I think it's imperative in these last 4 games that UCLA finish strong, just given how front loaded this thing is. Iowa at home. West Coast fans are going to get a rude awakening to Iowa football and what that's like. We used to have a coach, Rick Neuheisel, where, at one time he said punting is winning. And I was telling my friends, like, no, like Iowa, they really do think punting is winning. Like they believe. So, Iowa at home, at Washington, and then SC in the rivalry game, and Fresno State. I think the way UCLA finishes the year, a 3-1 finish right there, for example, more than anything else that they do is probably, the most crucial thing there to set up, hey, like we finished the year strong. It's a story to sell in recruiting. It's a story to sell, for NIL and whatnot. Anytime you beat USC, it pumps up the UCLA crowd a bit. So that finishing kick to the year, I think, is really important. Best case, as I look at this, you win the first 2, you then win, I think best case, you're looking at like 6 to 7 wins here. And maybe, you can get to 7 to 8 over there. If you happen to pull off an upset and you win the games you're supposed to, you can get to 7 to 8. The worst case is, you lose all the big games, you lose the road games at, Rutgers and Nebraska, you lose the rivalry game, and then you are looking at like the 4-8 kind of year, right? Or 3. So that's, I think, the worst case. I'm hopeful that, you can hopefully get to a bowl game looking at the schedule. Just given where everything is at and given that, the years of not recruiting, we're going to catch up, and it's about to catch up, right? And the schedule is now hard. If we can get to a bowl game and finish the year strong at the end, that's what I think I'd be looking for. Because again, it's all about college football storytelling. College sports is storytelling, right? You want to be able to tell a story to your base, to recruits, to your donors, so that you can build for the next year to come. And the buzz that Deshaun Foster has created, I think if he does that, he has a window here where he can really capitalize. Because I think what we've seen is, UCLA, Los Angeles is a big city. There's a lot of players here. And the moment that UCLA just goes and gets out the door and starts talking to people, they come back in. We've been seeing that this offseason. And so if Deshaun Foster can do that with this schedule, I think he's got a window here to start to build on that.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, and it didn't dawn on me until you were talking about this, but those last 3 games are all West Coast games, which might matter more to recruiting because you're going to mostly be, certainly you'll compete nationally for recruits, but Washington, UCLA, and Fresno State, or USC and Fresno State, like they're all on your coastline. And so you go 2-1 or 3-0 in those games. It's not just a successful season, but it's a shot across the bow to all those programs and to anyone on the West Coast saying, we're still here and we've got it. We're building our program. Come and play for us. And I think that passion, that energy that Deshaun Foster is bringing, I think is really helpful. So that's helpful insight, I think, in understanding the psyche of where UCLA as a program is. And one other thought, and I'd be curious if you've thought about this, Kevin.
Yeah.
One of the benefits of playing in the Big Ten, it's both it's a struggle, but it's a benefit, is the defenses are very stout, right? Traditionally. And I've said this about especially Iowa for years, their margin for error is always super thin because offensively they're challenged. And you have several teams on the schedule where the offense is not like is not great, or at least it hasn't been great. Like Penn State, I'm high on Penn State this year, but like Penn State has not been like an offensive juggernaut the past couple of years. Rutgers, I think very, very good, but offensively, they struggled. They don't have a ton of playmakers. Iowa, same thing. Nebraska, they're probably starting a freshman quarterback in Dylan Raiola. So there is opportunity here where you might swipe a couple wins that you didn't think you were going to get either. Do you have any further thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, Penn State, I mean, I think they've been waiting for Drew Aller to kind of take the next step for a long time now. And so, like, depending on, I think the big key in all of this is, can UCLA get an edge rush together this year? Because no matter how poor an offense might look, if you're having to compensate all the time and bring pressure from elsewhere, you have the potential to get beat. And so I think, depending on how UCLA holds their water there, again, you talked about Penn State, they've been waiting for Drew Aller to be good for a while. Iowa, Cade McNamara hasn't worked out there because he's been injured. Nebraska going to be starting a freshman. Rutgers defense is usually where their calling card is. Not so strong on offense. So there are going to be those games. Like, those are the kind of games that I think that UCLA has to find a way to, particularly, so the home games on those ones, they got to win them. The games against Rutgers, against Nebraska, those are like the real swing games to me on the schedule. Because you go to Penn State, like, it's going to be tough for anyone, right?
Yeah.
But the likes of Rutgers and Nebraska, who are still trying to figure things out a bit here, there's enough talent here to where, if we can get the offense together, you should be able to go up there and at least play a game to where you take it deep into the fourth quarter, and then, like, you see kind of what happens. Whose quarterback is better. You try to turn into that kind of a game. So I think that's going to be something that all the West Coast schools are thinking about. I've been trying to educate our West Coast friends here that think that, the offenses are all bad, and so we're just going to go up and down. No, you're not. Like, when particularly when you're playing on the surfaces out in the Midwest, and you're playing in those road environments, like, you're going to find it much harder.
Yeah.
When the weather turns in October and whatnot. The likes of Oregon and whatnot, they're kind of Ohio State West. So, like, some of them are gonna do well no matter what. But it's different style of football. It's line of scrimmage football. The West Coast teams that haven't emphasized that for a long time, they're going to have to emphasize that a bit more. And also, maybe you'll see that, because Ohio State was the one that was already kind of like that in the Big Ten. If you see, the likes of Lincoln Riley and USC and Oregon and such, like, coming around, like, you might have to counter adjust too on the other side. So it's exciting to see where the league will go with that.
Yeah, it'll definitely be clash of styles, and I think it'll be interesting to see how in this first year the West Coast schools really do adjust, because it's how much of it is going to be that the traditional schools have to really shift their game plan a little bit, and especially as they travel out to the West Coast. So be good. Let me I didn't ask you this in preparation, but I think one of my most favorite rivalry traditions is that USC and UCLA wears their home uniforms together. And I wish Ohio State, Michigan did it, but I think it's the coolest look of any rivalry game to see those powder blues and those the red, I don't know what shade of red it is. I think, is it crimson that or garnet?
Yeah, they call it garnet and red, yeah, and yellow, but we tend not to think about those colors. But yeah,
That's fair. Well, tell me a little bit more about the USC UCLA rivalry from a Bruin perspective.
I think it was said well that because Rick Neuheisel was a coach here, and he didn't do all that well, but he was a player, in the 80s and whatnot, and he spoke about this a lot, where in the 80s and in portions of the 90s and before that, like 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, a lot of times that Rose Bowl came down to the winner of the Ohio State Michigan game and the winner of the USC UCLA game. And, from a TV standpoint, you'd wake up on the West Coast, you'd watch Ohio State and Michigan play, and then you'd watch this one. And that's kind of how like the day went. And it's like, all right, well, now who's playing in the Rose Bowl? And for the longest time, that's kind of what it was. USC is kind of the traditional power in the old Pac-12, right? The one with the most college football history and such, with the likes of the Michigans, Ohio States, and all the other schools that are out there, and they had the most championships. UCLA, because maybe we haven't been as good for a long time, it's hard, people don't realize that we're tied for second, and we were actually outright second until Washington went and won this year. So you can imagine what it was like for so many years until you got here. The crosstown rivalry is a really fun one. You have guys in high school where they play together in high school, and one went here and one went there. That's always a fun part of it. You got sibling rivalries on the team. You have the people who are high school rivals remain college rivals. Like you got a lot of that local flavor to it. Very much like in the city of Los Angeles, the whole house divided stuff, like that all that stuff rings true. Both schools love their teams very much. The rivalry extends beyond football and whatnot. It's truly, I would say, like an institutional rivalry. I mean, you can tell me as an Ohio State fan, but like maybe it's because I only watch Michigan football, but I've always felt that rivalry was like truly about football, like, and it was such a special rivalry, like with football, like for so many reasons. And you tell me if I'm wrong about that, but like
it's
USC, UCLA, like professors hate each other. Like it's all this stuff.
I think it's certainly transformed to be more of the institutional, but it's certainly, it really took off with the Woody and Bo.
Right. The
Like
10-year
the
war.
10-year war. Yeah. Where that I think really, I think the Ohio State Michigan rivalry really, the foundation is football. It sounds like for what you're saying is that the foundation for USC UCLA is more just your crosstown.
It's the crosstown universities.
Yeah.
The crosstown universities that compete on so many levels for students, for applicants, for so many things.
Yeah. How far apart are the campuses?
In like literal sense, like we're talking 10 to 15 miles. I don't know the exact number on top of my head,
Okay.
but it's not very far.
Yeah.
To actually get from one place to the other, that depends what time you're leaving.
Right. It might be a couple hours.
Yeah. And I know we're going to talk about like the arenas and such. Like USC, they play in the Coliseum. That happens to be like right outside campus. So it's a real convenient thing for them. For us, we play in the Rose Bowl, which is much further from campus.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. Like, so the Rose Bowl is in Pasadena. How far is Pasadena from UCLA?
Yeah, it's a solid, 20 to 25 miles from campus. So it's not close to campus by any means.
Yeah. So historic venue, great venue, but not convenient.
Yeah, and so kind of describing what a Bruin game day is like for the students out there. The school will arrange these, shuttle buses and things like that, where they'll pick them up on campus starting like 4 or 5 hours before the game, and they'll drive them to the Rose Bowl and such. And so like the school does what they can to get the students out there and whatnot. The disadvantage of the Rose Bowl obviously is, again, it's not on campus. You got to go through that whole setup. If you're going to a game at UCLA, as a student, like you're literally planning for the entire day. You're planning to like leave like 4 or 5 hours before, and then it's going to take you some time to like get out of the Rose Bowl and then get back. So that's like the inconvenience side of it. From a traffic standpoint, kind of no matter where you are in LA, unless you're like in Pasadena, it's not the easiest place to get to. Like if you're in West LA or South LA or whatever that might be, or a lot of alumni in Orange County, right? Like it's all like a bit of a trek from each of these different places. So location wise, it can be trouble. The great parts about the Rose Bowl, I think, is what you said. It's the storied arena. You can I mean, I don't want to get too deep into it, but you can smell it like when you get inside, right? Like
Yeah.
you get inside and you feel like you walk into the Rose Bowl and you see like all the placards of all the Rose Bowl games and such that were played there. And UCLA has been playing there for a long time, right? They've been playing since the 80s and such in the Rose Bowl. So that part's really cool. The tailgating scene at the Rose Bowl is a lot of fun because it's right alongside the golf course. So you get,
that's fun.
yeah, so you got the whole golf course like in tailgating and stuff. I'm excited to see what that looks like when the Big Ten teams come over, because I'm sure you're going to see a lot of Midwesterners wanting to come out to LA, right, to take a trip and whatnot. And I could see the tailgating scene becoming even bigger, than what it is. That part's a lot of fun. When UCLA is right and when they're doing good, the fans show up. And I think this is like one of the, the conceptions, because of what's been going on with Chip Kelly and whatnot these past 6-7 years. Like I remember when I was a senior in school, I'm going to give my age here, but when I was a senior in school, and Jim Mora's first year, we'd come off of some really bad years of Rick Neuheisel, and it was like we turned it around. We're in the race for the conference, and I remember like right away, the fever was back, and you started seeing 80,000 crowds and 75,000, 80,000, 85,000 crowds all back, and that kind of continued on through his tenure. So when UCLA is right, the fan experience, the environment can be a lot of fun too. UCLA during those years led the league in attendance during that initial 3-4 year period. So that can be a lot of fun. When UCLA, when UCLA is not doing so well, given all the extremities around it, it's a distracted market. LA is not a Midwestern town. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of pro sports and whatnot. You can get lesser crowds, and that's I'm sure all the pictures and stuff that people have seen, right? Like it's true, real. Like we deal with it, and in those instances, the Rose Bowl can be kind of a disadvantage, because what actually is like a 50, 60,000 crowd looks like a 10,000 crowd, because it's this massive arena where people are sprinkled in. But I like the Rose Bowl. I love tailgating at the Rose Bowl now that I'm not a student there anymore. So, when I go, it's to have a good time and whatnot. So I can plan my day around it and go. Great tradition. I wish we could build a stadium on campus, but for so many reasons, I don't think that'll be happening. And so, the Rose Bowl, it's a fun time, and I'm excited for all the Big Ten fans to come and see it.
Yeah. One of my big bucket list items is to see a game at the Rose Bowl. One of my colleagues, and a good friend of the show too, Chris, if you're listening, shout out to you, buddy. But he actually, his dad, Jim, they got to see Penn State play the Rose Bowl when they played Utah a couple years ago. And I was like, I am so grateful for you guys, and I'm so jealous. But it's at least on television, it's the coolest scene I've ever seen. But it's helpful to understand both the pros and the cons from a UCLA perspective.
I've been to 2 Rose Bowl games. So my wife, I'm married into a Midwestern family. My wife, grew up in Iowa, and she went to Oklahoma.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when OU played in the Rose Bowl against Georgia, that, the classic double overtime game with Baker Mayfield and all that.
Wow.
I was at the game. So I got to see that live. Yeah. That was a great game. And that was the first time I went to the Rose Bowl game, right? Where you see it as the Rose Bowl, and that setup is something real special. I also went to the Rose Bowl this past year, the playoff game with Michigan and Alabama. So I went to that game too. And the setup of the actual Rose Bowl game, particularly I think going forward when they use it for these playoff type settings, there's really nothing like it for so many reasons. I mean, just again, you walk around the arena, you just feel like you're a part of this great tradition that's about to happen. And then you go in, and all the fans feel that, and then they're all kind of engaged through the whole time and whatnot. It's a great sight. Yeah.
I've learned something now about you too, Kevin, is that if you go to the Rose Bowl, it's going to go to at least overtime, maybe 2. So
I've been to a lot of other games.
Well, I mean the Rose Bowl game. or the playoff. We're going to get a good one because apparently when you go, it's a playoff.
They're all
Or it's
overtime games. Yeah, you're right.
yeah. That's awesome. Wow. Well, I'll get you out on this. We've gone over, but this has been great. As a UCLA alum, I know you're in Northern California now, but when we come to LA, come to campus, go out to Pasadena, what's the local fare like? What should we be eating and where should we be going?
Yeah, so I think you break that up into two parts. There's Westwood, which is where campus is itself, and so you go to Westwood. The starting point has to be Diddy Reese. Cookies, cookie sandwiches. It's a Westwood classic that you can get like a dozen of these amazing cookies for like $3. I don't know what it is now, but yeah,
awesome.
It sounds insane, right? Yeah, it sounds insane. You get these like really good ice cream cookie sandwiches for like $2. It's great. Fat Sal's, that's like a staple for late night, the greasy sandwiches and such. That's a great thing to do out there. Bella Pita right next door for pita sandwiches. There's always In-N-Out in California. If you're
Yeah.
you got to have your In-N-Out, and this is all the stuff that I just described is like in a kind of a one block area with like In-N-Out, Bella Pita, Fat Sal's in like one area, and then Diddy Reese like right behind it. So Westwood's amazing. Great, college town. I love everything about it. Then there's Pasadena, right? So Pasadena, where the Rose Bowl is, and so Zed actually sent me these ones because he's done more of this than I have. But Lucky Boy for the breakfast burritos, definitely do that before the game. Pie and Burger. This is like kind of a old school diner type from the 60s. So you can check that out. Good burgers, good pies, and things of that nature. But the food scene in LA is just, we could have another podcast just about that. So like for all the folks coming out, definitely dedicate your time to basically just eating and then going to the game and don't try to do anything else.
That's a beautiful thing. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
I've gained 10 pounds just listening to all this. This is great.
You gain 10 more when you come on out here when Ohio State plays.
Absolutely. That sounds amazing. So out of all of those, if you had to pick one, like what's the one thing that you'd say, this is the one thing you've got to do in terms of food?
So something unique to UCLA has to be like Fat Sal's, because like that's like the sandwich place that's like there that like all the students go to, athletes love it, right? Like that's something that's like Westwood, that like it's this like outdoor shack kind of environment. Like that's the one I would say like definitely go check that out. But honestly, like that's selling it short because like I just gave you that list. I could go for a long time on like a lot of places you got to check out in LA.
So in the fall, when if you want to come back, you're more than welcome to come back. This is a formal invitation. We will talk about food, and we'll talk about a matchup at some point, and we'll delve more into this because I think this is a fascinating thing, talking about local fare and cuisine on different campuses. So that's on the docket now.
Let's do it. I will get my bigger list ready, and I will come with a detailed description of what each of them are. Let's do it.
Yes. All right. It sounds good. Kevin, where again can we find you, and who else is on your team at Bruin Source?
Yeah, so the team at Bruin Source, myself, Zed Qureshi, Isaiah Lowry's. You can find us at our handle right here at Bruin Source. That's where we are on Twitter. We release podcasts on a weekly basis, usually around Wednesday night Pacific time. That'll be on it'll be on our Twitter, but it'll also be on all the places you get your podcasts. So Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Spotify, whatever that might not be. So yeah, please go ahead, check it out. Go ahead and message us if you have anything. Tweet at us if you got any stuff about the Bruins or any other questions about the Bruins coming to the Big Ten. We'd love to hear from you. And yeah, please go check us out.
Yep. Make sure to follow Kevin and the rest of the team at Bruin Source. Make sure to follow them, subscribe, and of course, obviously, subscribe here. One thing I haven't mentioned in a while, but make sure to leave reviews if you like the podcast, whether it's on Apple or if it's on YouTube or Spotify. Leave us comments. I will get back to you. I will respond to each comment. So, Kevin, thanks so much for joining us. For the rest of you, thanks for listening. Take care. God bless.
Thank you. Go Bruins.